So anyways.
All right. All right. Welcome everyone. Hello. Welcome to Thursday Daf Yomi Week in Review. Thank you for the wave. I see some waves. That's nice. Okay. All right. I am Rachel Scheinerman. This is Daf Yomi Week in Review, hosted by My Jewish Learning, and as you know, a rotating cast of teachers. And this morning we are joined by Rabbi Elliot Goldberg. Let's go ahead and get started.
All right. Hi, everybody. Good morning. It's good to see you all. I see some smiles and some waves. It's always nice to jump into the week of review of Talmud. As I was reviewing this week's material, I said, oh, what a week we had. The thief steals something and then makes an oath to say he didn't, so it's a false oath. And so that adds penalties, but he stole from a convert and the convert died and had no heirs. So there's no one to pass on the stuff to, and it goes to the priests. And is it a gift? And is it I don't, it was one of those weeks of Talmud where it felt like this, in some ways, this was like my experience as a student of math. Like I studied trigonometry and then someone said, oh, let's take exponents and apply it to trigonometry. And then you get a whole thing of math where you take two different things of math and push them together. I felt that this week, like we're dealing with theft and return, stolen goods. And then we're like, well, what if we combine that with the rules of false oaths? And what if we combine that with the rules of inheritance? And what if we combine that with converts and priests? And we get a lot of suyot that seem very similar, but each had a little particular difference. And I'm ready for next week. After all of that, that's my state of being. I was happy to see, some of with the Talmud, it's big and vast, and you get what you get. I was looking for a fun story to bring us this week, and I read through the entire week again, and it seems we didn't have so many stories this week. I was trying to break the monotony. Anyways, that's just a dump of where I am today. Yeah, I did.
Well, we have a lot to look forward to next week, Rabbi Goldberg. We are finishing this tractate next week.
It is true.
The end of this tractate actually coincides with the leap day on February 29th. So stay tuned. We will have a siyum on February 29th to celebrate. You'll be joining us then, and you'll also be joining us 2 days earlier. We're going to start advertising this more broadly for a one-off class on the Hadran. So as you may remember, if you've joined us for other siyums, other programs that celebrate the end of the tractate, we always say the Hadran at the end. And we always say it pretty fast and don't talk about it very much. So we're going to have Rabbi Goldberg is going to offer on Tuesday a special class on the Hadran, what's going on with it, who are all the Rav Papas that we always read about in the Hadran. So that is also something to look forward to next week before we move on from Bava Kama to Bava Metzia.
Yes. Thanks for that. It's good. I'm excited. I actually wanted to learn more about the Hadron myself. So I said, oh, maybe I'll teach about it. Then I have to learn about it. So I got to do some study. So thanks for the opportunity. Rob Papas and other things coming next week. But all right, let's jump into this week. I think the theme that I'm bringing is really about what it's like to be a reader of Daf Yomi, and how being a reader of Daf Yomi affects your reading of each new page. And also, I guess maybe the upsides of that and the downsides of that, or the benefits of that and the challenges of that. And so while we're going to jump into a particular issue, what I want to share about is really about what our experience as readers might be like, and how it impacts what we see and what we think about the Talmud. If you're a reader of the My Jewish Learning Daily email, that's one way into Daf Yomi. It's so your challenge is 500 to 800 words a day on one topic, and you get a good glimpse of something on the page. If you're reading the full page every day, now I don't know, 4-ish years in, something like that. I know Rob Plass will know exactly how many days it is. I saw him on. He's always good at the exact calendar count. It's a marathon and a sprint, right? There's we have to keep going. You have to keep pace. You have to keep up because every day there's a new page. But sometimes like the pace is just killer, like a sprint. And some things sink in and some things don't sink in. And that's what, in theory, what I want to reflect on based on something that I noticed about one thing we read this week. So I'm going to share my screen. And what I brought, the text I brought today, it's from page 105. And the version that I'm using is just the Steinsaltz English volume, and I'm using the PDF today. So it's in the middle of page 105. And we're starting with the first full paragraph you see on your screen. Rava raises a dilemma. So here we go. This is a dilemma that we saw this week on page 105. It fits into what we've been talking about thieves returning stolen goods. And Rava asked the following question. So if one robbed another of 2 bundles of goods that were worth 1 pruta in total, and he returned one of them to the robbery victim, what's the halacha? So what's going on here? The minimum amount of something to be a something that matters for theft is 1 pruta, meaning if you steal something worth less than a pruta, it's as if you haven't taken anything. It's not significant enough in value to be a something, right? So the lower limit that something has to pass to become enough property to fall into the category of theft is a pruta. But so here we have a robber who took 2 bundles of things. I don't know, think 2 little boxes of small boxes of paper clips or something, not worth very much. The robber returned one of them and so still holds half a pruta's worth of stolen property. What are they supposed to do? Do we say, ask the Gemara, that now there's no longer a stolen item in the possession of the robber? So we could say the robber doesn't have enough stolen possession to count as stolen possession. So maybe the robber doesn't have to return the second bundle. Or perhaps do we say that the robber did not return the stolen item that was in his possession in its entirety, and he has to return the second bundle? So that's a question, right? The robber steals these 2 small bundles, not worth very much, returns one of them. Is the robber done returning what he stole? You could say yes, because what he's got left isn't significant, so the returning that he did counts. And you could say no. The robber stole a whole pruta's worth of something, has to return the whole thing. He started the process and didn't finish it. That's the question that Rava asked, and Rava answers the question himself in this next paragraph. So Rava then resolves the dilemma. I love it when the rabbis in the Gemara ask a question and then they answer it for themselves. Here's one of those times. Rava says there's no stolen item here, as the remaining bundle is worth less than 1 pruta, and there's no returning of a stolen item here. And what that seems to mean at first glance is Rava saying he's got half a pruta's worth of stuff left. That's not significant. So he doesn't possess stolen property anymore. So there's no stolen property that needs to be returned. The Gemara challenges this response a little bit, and it challenges really on its language a little bit. But they say if there's no stolen item here, and what remains is significant. If there's no stolen item here, as what remains with is insignificant, it follows that there is fulfillment of the mitzvah of returning the stolen goods here, and the robber ought to be exempt and no longer in possession of a stolen item. So the Gemara is saying, Rava, based on what you said, if you don't have any stolen goods, you should be done. It shouldn't be just that there's no returning of stolen item here. We should say that he's exempt from any more returning, and he's actually fulfilled the mitzvah of returning. The returning that he did was enough to fulfill the mitzvah, and he's done. It's not just that he has nothing left to do. And because of that challenge, the Gemara reinterprets or rephrases what Rava is saying to say, even though the robber is exempt from returning the second bundle, there is no stolen item here, and nevertheless, no fulfillment of the mitzvah. In other words, if the robber stole 1 pruta worth of stuff and returned half of it, they're under no obligation to return the second half because it's not worthwhile. But they haven't qualified to as fulfill to as a someone who's fulfilled the mitzvah of returning the stolen item because they haven't returned all of the stolen goods. So the robber's sort of in this middle ground. They don't have to return it, but they don't get credit for returning the other half, which is also an insignificant value because it's not the full quantity. So they're sort of, I guess if the robber would want to be fully absolved of the theft, they could return the other piece too, and then they've returned all of it, but they don't have to because it's not a significant value property. Anyways, that's the sugya from today. It comes from a long conversation about returning of stolen goods and a recent conversation about what's the minimum value of things. And it might be when you stumbled upon this, you said, interesting question. Okay, Rava, you asked this question, you answer it. An interest, it's not a surprising topic for the Gemara to take on. It fits in well with this sugya. And okay, here's another piece, and we could say, okay, ready to move on. What was interesting to me was what comes next here, and this will get back to our experience of readers of Daf Yomi, which is the topic I want to come back to in a second. So, following this dilemma, the Gemara cites something similar that Rava taught. And here's the first reader of Daf Yomi comment piece. What's exciting about this is it's a sugya it's a conversation about the Nazarite, which if you've been with us for a couple months, we studied Masachet Nazir. So this is an area of Talmud we're already familiar with if we started from the beginning. Right? What's challenging about Daf Yomi sometimes is while the Gemara has a beginning and end in the way we order the books, in terms of content, it doesn't. Right? The very first Mishnah of Gemara refers to Mishnayot and other topics from halfway across, the Talmud. And so there's an assumption sort of that the whole Talmud before you know the whole Talmud before you've even read it. I guess it makes your second cycle of Daf Yomi easier because you really do know the whole Talmud before you go back. But it's sometimes nice to find the Gemara quote, a passage that relates to a topic we're more familiar with because we studied before. And what this has to do with the ritual at the end of the Nazarite term, when the Nazarite who has not shaved his hair, cut his hair during the period of his Nazaritehood, Nazariteness, I don't know what the right word is, period of being a Nazarite, they shave their head at the end, and the hair becomes part of the rituals at the end of the Nazarite term. And Rava asks a very similar question that he does today about stolen goods that he does about the haircut. And the Gemara, since we're on this Rava's teaching and it's a similar conversation, the Gemara brings it here. So it says, and Rava says, the sages said that a Nazarite who shaved his head as required but left 2 hairs uncut has done nothing, as his obligation is to shave has not been fulfilled. So if you still see me on the screen, you could, I'm not a Nazarite, but my haircut ritual is similar to a Nazarite haircut ritual. And I know very well, sometimes I cut my hair and then I look at my mirror the next day and there are 2 hairs sticking up on the top of my head that I missed. It happens with whatever blade or electric shaver you're using. So I relate to this personally. And it makes sense that this could happen. It's a question the Nazarite discovers, oh my God, I shaved my whole head, but I left 2 hairs, right? And the sages said they haven't yet completed their obligation to shave their head because there are 2 hairs left. Seems to suggest that 2 hairs are some sort of minimum threshold, right? If you have 2 hairs left, you haven't completed your haircut. So Rava raises a dilemma, and here you'll see an echo with what we studied above. If a Nazarite shaved the left 2 hairs, and afterwards shaved one of them, but then the second one fell out by itself, what's the halacha? So it's sort of like the bundles, right? There are 2 hairs left. The Nazarites shaved one, but one fell out. Does that count as shaving his whole head? Or is it because one of them fell out and he didn't cut it, it doesn't count as shaving his whole head? Rav Acha Bar Difti says to Ravina the following comments about this is, hey, maybe Rava's talking about just can you shave your head one hair at a time? Because this case is sort of like you shave your hair one hair at a time, and now we're at the end. Maybe there's the last two, and you get one, and one falls out. Does that count? But Ravina says, no, we need to talk about this because this case could also be about where when there are two hairs left, the first one falls out and the second one you cut. So it's not about cutting your hair one at a time. Out. So we go back to the question, do we say now, in any event, there is no measure of hair left on his head because the second hair fell out, so he's complete? Or do we say that this isn't shaving since he left two hairs uncut? And when he goes back to shave, there's only one hair left to shave, and shaving one hair isn't significant enough to be shaving. Rava, again, in this case, resolves the dilemma. There's no hair here. There's no shaving here. He uses that same form of expression. He doesn't have hair, so there isn't shaving. There aren't two hairs left. One fell out, so it doesn't count as shaving. And the Gemara says same thing. The Gemara is surprised if there's no hair here, then there is shaving here because there's no hairs left. If all the hairs are gone, then he shaved. How could Rava say that? The Gemara says this is what Rava meant. Even though there's no hair here, as there was only one hair left, there can't be a mitzvah of shaving. So he failed. So since he failed to shave all this hair on the first attempt, the second time there's not enough hair left. It doesn't count as shaving, and this Nazarite, while it might be bald, hasn't fully completed the obligation of the ritual at the end of the Nazarites. All right, I'm gonna come back to you on the screen here. Stop shaving. So those are the two sugyot. This is not an unheard of pattern in the Gemara where someone teaches something and then they say, here's something similar that the same rabbi taught about something else. Right? We often see a rabbi teaches something and we get a whole bunch of teachings just by virtue of the fact that it's by the same rabbi. But here we get a teaching that's by the same rabbi and the same structure and sort of the same sort of objection and a similar solution. Both deal with minimums, and both deal with can you complete a mitzvah if you sort of do less than what's considered the minimum, returning less than the minimum value or shaving less than the minimum number of hairs to be shaving. So my first experience of this was I read this case from Rava and said, oh, okay, they're asking this question about the minimum bundles, fine. And oh, neat, here's the parallel. Here's something from Nazir. And my first thought was, it's nice to see something a little bit familiar to understand the current thing. Because, we came into this as we're exploring the laws of returning stolen goods. And in some ways, Rava's case is helping us provide something new. And then when we jump in and start talking about the Nazarite, I was like, oh, here's familiar territory. I'm in a topic that I've studied before. Isn't it nice that this same thing applies there too? And it was nice to see a concept that I was learning new applied not just to the new topic of our current Masachet, but also they applied the same topic to something we had studied in the past. And then I went and dug a little further, and I looked in the traditional Vilna Shas, right, the traditional Hebrew text, and where there's a commentary that tells you about where things in the Gemara show up other places in the Gemara. And lo and behold, here's what I discovered. I haven't been following the text to see if someone noticed this already and put this in the chat. One of you might have already said this. I didn't follow. We'll see. But there's a note on page 105 above a comma that says the second part of the sugya about Nazir happens to be in Masachet Nazir on page 42. So it caught me that it's not just that it's familiar, this second section, because I know a little bit about the Nazarite. It's actually, I read this specific case when we studied Masachet Nazir, and it shouldn't be that it's just familiar that because I know a little bit about the Nazir, it should be familiar because I actually read these two paragraphs then. And I see a couple people nodding or laughing with me. So either you had that experience too. And it struck me, at least my experience, right? I read this for the first time. Well, I guess the second time is my point. But I read it this time in Baba Kama, right, with the Steinsaltz English that doesn't have this commentary. And had you asked me on the day that I read it the first time, um, have you seen this before? I would have said, I don't think so, because what it ranked for the details of a Nazarite and the fact that the Nazarite has to shave and the fact that the rabbis might be concerned with what counts as shaving, that wasn't new. This particular fact about Rava dealing with 2 hairs left, what do you do, felt new and felt relevant, not because it was familiar to what we read right before. And, it had escaped my mind totally that I had read this a few months back. So what do I do with that? So um, I felt sad for a minute that I didn't remember that I had read this paragraph a few months ago. But then I caught myself feeling sad and said, well, that's silly. I mean, I know people who have those kinds of eidetic memories that remember actually everything they read. I know I'm not one of those persons, and that's not my experience. And the fact that for even a moment, I would have expected myself to like retain 4 years of Daf Yomi and think that somehow I missed the mark because I didn't remember this little sugya, made me laugh at myself. Right? The Talmud is big. We read a lot, and we don't. Oh, thank you, Rob. Rob says, to be fair, we read Nasir 42 almost a year ago. Right? So, right, if we don't remember, that's okay. Got it. It only feels like a few months, but it's already been a year. Right? So some self-compassion is important here. I get that. But it made me think that, what are we doing here with this Daf Yomi? Right, because it doesn't seem that it's a reasonable goal unless you're someone with eidetic memory to say, I'm reading a Daf of Talmud every day so that I know the whole Talmud, so that if you ask me a question after I'm done with the 7 years, I can answer any question about anything in the Talmud because I know the whole Talmud. Like, I've read the whole Talmud and I know about the whole Talmud, but I don't remember the whole Talmud. So on some level, here are some of my takeaways from this. I think it's nice that the Talmud repeats itself because I got a chance to revisit this sugya. And while I read it I guess on March 6th, as Rob said, almost a year ago, I didn't retain it. But now when it came back, it feels familiar. And the Talmud's making a connection for me between a topic that makes sense that the Talmud talked about a year ago, what counts as cutting your hair and how many hairs you have to cut it. And that shows me that Rava's legal thinking about hair cutting at minimum values is parallel to his legal thinking about returning of stolen goods. And I know something new about Rava, and maybe that I'm going to remember, or maybe not. But it makes me think that the purpose of reading the Talmud every day, in some ways, it's to be in it and to be in the conversation that we have together. But the purpose is about to gain a general familiarity with all of it. We read all of these details, holding us to the expectation that we're going to remember all of them isn't realistic for the most of us. And that means what we should aim to be retaining are broad trends about the Talmud itself, broad topics about each of the Masechtot, each of the areas of law that they cover, some fun facts about the rabbis and how they talk about the Talmud, and to just remember there are lots of connections in the Talmud that one could make that but you have to go back and dig a little bit to find some of them. So in some ways, it was a fun moment to see this Nazir discussion that was parallel to ours. It was a humbling moment because I didn't remember reading it before. But ultimately, it was a redeeming moment that says you're not supposed to remember every detail, and that being engaged in this process is about it's about the journey and what you see and the conversations that you have, and we are going to take away particular things from it. I have on my to-do list for when we're done to come back to this question after 7.5 years of doing Daf Yomi to say, what is really the takeaway? What am I getting out of it? It's something I want to spend some time thinking about, but I think I need the next couple of years to get the whole experience. But I guess you got today a little glimpse of what I've been thinking about that experience because of Rava and his parallel teachings from two parts of the Talmud, one of which I thought I was seeing for the first time today, even though I wasn't. And I was sad and then just fine with seeing it again. Anyways, that's what I have for today. Thoughts, comments, responses, anything, Rachel, I don't know if you've been able to follow the chat and call something out, or if someone has a question, wants to raise their hand, we have a couple of minutes.
Thank you. We have one technical question that we should probably address, but I'll stick with the question about Daf Yomi because this came up in the fall of 2019 when I started talking at work about doing a project like this. And one question we had is Daf Yomi even a good way of teaching Talmud, right? Is this even a good way of learning Talmud? And this comes up every time there's a new cycle. Some people say, this is the way to learn Talmud. And some people say, this is drinking from a fire hose. It's absolutely impossible to retain details. It's practically impossible to focus on details when you're trying to do an entire daf every day, especially if you want to look into commentaries or things like that. And so, and the first time I learned Talmud was in a summer yeshiva program at Hadar, and we spent the entire summer on the first few pages of the 10th chapter of Tractate Pesachim. I think we got through maybe 3 or 4 dapim the whole summer, right? It was just line by line, sometimes spent the whole day on a line. And I don't know. I've sort of come to think there's value in this and value in that, right? There was a lot of value in sitting in that yeshiva and parsing it line by line and really understanding what's going on. And I also think that the Daf Yomi program and getting a bird's eye view of the Talmud and their concerns and starting to get a quick sense of patterns and overall concerns and the lay of the landscape is also really valuable. So we try to do a little of this and a little of that in our newsletter, as you all know, by focusing on one thing on the page, right? So we can think a little more seriously about one thing instead of trying to drink in everything on the page. And yeah, exactly, Beth, like a spiral curriculum. Hopefully, I feel like it's been very valuable for me. I'm forced to read all of it because I'm on the editorial end. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. This came up also, I think, in our 2-year celebration of Daf Yomi. We had a panel of people talking about it, and one of them was extremely critical about Daf Yomi even as a pedagogical method. And there's fairness in that. I think there's value to it, and there like all things, there's limitation. But happy for you to share your experiences and your thoughts about Daf Yomi as a method of learning Talmud. Now that many of us on this call have been doing it for a long time, or if you're relatively new and joining us relatively recently, happy to hear your thoughts too. In the meantime, Rabbi Goldberg, the people want to know, if I steal half a pruta today and half a pruta tomorrow, have I stolen?
Half a pruta today and half. So that question sounds to me like
it's very Talmudic.
Right, it is. It's a good Talmud question, right? I steal half a pruta from you today and I go back tomorrow and I steal another half a pruta. Is that two separate actions that each of which don't count because the threshold is too little? Or is it cumulative, just there's a pause in the middle? So as far as I remember, the rabbis haven't addressed this in the last couple of weeks on these pages, and I actually am a few weeks ahead because of my editorial deadlines, and I don't think they actually asked this coming forward. It strikes me that it's parallel. There are conversations about like how long is a pause that matters, right? And the rabbi's answer to that is, right, if you pause long enough for a student to greet their teacher, that's a pause, which is really just saying, a short phrase of greeting. That might say to me those are two separate acts, and neither one reaches the threshold. I'm sure Rabbi Yirmiyah, who's famous for the tough questions, would say, well, what if I steal, less than a pruta worth of grain from your warehouse every day for, however many days it takes, and then your whole warehouse is in my warehouse? Of course it's theft. But I'd have to dig into the halachic literature to know the official answer, but it strikes me that neither of those acts counts. I guess that means, if you have your favorite restaurant and you really like the sugar packets that they have on the table, and you take one home every time you eat there, that no matter how many sugar packets you take, and no matter how many times you go, it's not theft because each act is less than a pruta. I guess I'm making assumptions about the value of a pruta and the value of sugar, but I see some smiles. Like, we know who we are. We have those, things on the table at our favorite restaurants that, like, we like to have it. That's a great question. Very Talmudic. And I actually would just say, to bring it back to what connected to the sort of theme, if studying Daf Yomi allows you to ask a really good Talmudic question because you know what one is, or you're starting to think like the Talmud and the rabbis in how you approach the subject matter, whether you retain the details or not, like where, the people who asked questions like that, you've gotten something out of the study of Talmud because that's a question that comes from a Talmud cup, like a Talmud influenced brain. And that's a takeaway, that you've internalized, even if, the details of, even if we see what I just reviewed with you today, a year and a half from now in another Masechet, and you don't remember that you read it before or did it with me, you have that question that you came up with independently. And that might be the point of what we get from Daf Yomi.
All right, we are at time. So we are gonna call this morning's session to a close. I have put some links in the chat. If you take a minute to scroll up, you can find them. One is a sign up for Rabbi Goldberg's class on the Hadron, which will be held on Tuesday next. That's an opportunity to look at the formula that we say when we complete a tractate of Talmud. And then 2 days later on Thursday, we will complete this tractate of Talmud. You can join us for our siyum, for our celebration. And that will be 11 a.m. Eastern. And so sign up links are both in the chat. They will also come in the newsletter in coming days. And also, I was remiss in not mentioning before that this class will go on hiatus next Thursday because we'll be having the siyum that day. So we will be reviewing the whole tractate instead of just the past week. So looking forward to seeing you folks there. Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg. Thank you to all of
People
you.
should know it'll be in the link, but the siyum is if it's instead of this class, it's at a different time. So
Yes.
if you're interested in coming to this, if you want your Talmud fill next Thursday, make sure to check that link because I think it's at 11 o'clock.
Correct. It's an hour and a half later, whatever your time zone is. It's an hour and a half later than this class.
All right. Anyways, good to see you, everybody. Thanks, Rachel.
Okay. Thank you all. See you soon. Bye-bye.